Serious. People who work in the death industry, funeral directors, morticians, coroners, etc. What's the scariest paranormal experience you've had? Not in the industry, but my wife is. A few years ago, my wife received a call late in the night to drop a body off at the crematory. She had keys to the funeral home so she could do late night calls like this. She wanted to bring me along so she could show me around at night and to help her move the body into the van. Loading the body into the van and dropping it off to the crematory went smoothly. We had to return the cot back into the funeral home, so she went to go do that while I stayed and watched the door. I'm one of those guys who doesn't believe things until they see or experience it, so I was skeptical of anything paranormal. As I was watching the doors, I heard this voice behind my left ear aggressively say, "Help me." I immediately got chills and stepped outside to get away from whatever that was. My wife was still inside and came back out shortly after me. I let her know what I thought I heard, and she proceeds to tell me there was actually a body behind the doors I was facing against. It was an eerie experience, and I can't imagine what experiences late night workers there have gone through. Due to my profession, I come across the dead and anything related more often than your average Joe. In the past 8 years, I've been working as a funeral director here in Germany. Me and my colleagues have experienced numerous unexplainable things that stuck with us. Out of these, I'd like to share one with you today that was as clear as day, and surely not my imagination. This story begins at the end of a pickup in the middle of the night around 2 a.m. We had just finished rolling the casket into the cooling unit and were sitting by the desk around the corner filling in our nighttime sheets. You need to know that our hygienic area and the makeshift office are separated by our cache of caskets, waiting to be put to use. The light there is always off, so all the lighting you get is the faint shimmer of cold white light coming from the hygienic area. I looked to my left as I finished writing my timesheet and was startled to see a dark figure standing right on the walkway between the caskets illuminated from the back by the mentioned light. I slowly poked my colleague to look. He also saw the figure, and after a few seconds of blank staring, I called out to it thinking it was one of our other colleagues maybe. No answer, so I called out a second time. Yet again, nothing. Since we had intruders in the funeral home before, both of us got up and slowly walked towards the figure, further calling out to it. About halfway towards the figure, it suddenly turned away and audibly walked out of sight towards the cooling unit. My colleague and I quickly followed, but as we got around the corner, nothing was there. The big back door was still locked, and the only window was barred up and cluttered with stuff anyway. Out of fear of an actual intruder, we looked around searching anywhere but gave up eventually. Both of us are sure we saw a ghost that night, since it was too clear to just be some strange shadow. This time, I'd like to address strange occurrences around the funeral home, the crematory and other places connected to my job. Death often strikes fast and unexpected, possibly leaving numberless spirits wandering around not knowing what happened to them. These, as it seems, follow their body around leaving them in places that the body passes on its way into the grave. Normally, they don't appear to us as full-body spirits or shadow figures or whatnot, they mainly just mess around with stuff and make noises. Such as one that recently started throwing personal data sheets, each and every one of the deceased get one, off of the door of the big cooling unit every time someone new gets into the unit. We push them in, close the door, add the sheet, and once we've left, 1 or 2 sheets will all of a sudden fly off the door. We already adjusted to this by going away, waiting 1 or 2 minutes and coming back. I'd like to have footage of that, but I don't have cameras to put up there. Another thing is that you'll hear voices sometimes. The most extreme example of that must have been my colleague running out of the office claiming that somebody screamed at him. Voices are so common that we generally try to ignore them. It's unintelligible in most of the cases, and if we understand things, we usually can't make any sense of it. I personally talk to every single body I prepare, stating what I am going to do and what I am doing, just in case someone is listening. Little things go missing all of the time too. Tools, pens, candles and many other small objects. They're often gone for about a month, until we find them again in the most impossible places. A key got missing once. We later found it under a metal cupboard in our hygienic area. Odd thing was, when it got missing, it was hanging in its destined place on a holder in the office. This could as well be a colleague, but none of us gains anything from hiding stuff we need constantly. We also have the occasional slamming opening of doors, drawers, shelves and even empty caskets. The latter happened to me while I was alone. I noticed a strange wooden banging sound and something similar to creaking floorboards. I went to check it out and found a casket, which was ready to be used, and on the ground, slowly pulling one corner of its lid up for about half an inch, 1 centimeter, and slipping back down, causing the banging. I watched it for a couple of bangs and got so fed up with it that I just decided to grab the lid and push it shut. It stopped after that. When I was 16, I lost my father in a sudden and untimely manner. He had been under the influence of Calaxian and alcohol and crashed his vehicle into a brick wall. There were 3 other people in the car, all of which survived, thankfully. 2 weeks after the event, we had the funeral. It had taken 2 weeks because he had an autopsy. He had a closed casket service due to the nature of the injuries he sustained. The layout of the funeral home was rather simple. The upper floor consisted of a lobby-type entranceway, a large room with lots of elegant seating, and 2 split rooms utilized as the viewing rooms where the caskets are held. In the far back area of the funeral home, there's a small chapel-type room. On average, Grissom holds 2 funerals per day, seeing as it's a small funeral home that only has 2 viewing rooms. I also know this specifically because a family friend of ours is the gravedigger for the nearby cemetery for the funeral home. The lower basement level is just the cafeteria area where the family and friends of the deceased can gather to eat during the services. Anyway, to move on to the important bits, I was upstairs in the viewing room, sitting and speaking to some relatives that I hadn't spoken to in a while. My mom had approached me and asked if she could steal me away for a moment, and she pulled me into the lobby and asked me if I've been upstairs the entire time. I said I had been, and asked her why. She seemed unconvinced and I was, obviously, confused. She explained that she and at least 10 other people had witnessed me, plain as day, walk downstairs into the cafeteria and then walk into a small room that was apparently the supply room that held things like paper plates, plastic eating utensils, spare fold-out tables and chairs, and things of that nature. She tried to get my attention and I didn't look at her or anyone else, and I didn't respond either. I just walked into this supply room and shut the door behind me. She said she went after me because she was curious as to what I was doing, but when she went to open the door, it was locked. She was really confused and she knocked on the door and called my name, but didn't get a response. She got really worried and went to get one of the clergy and explained that I was locked in the supply room and a member of the clergy had come down to unlock the door and nothing. No one was in there. My mom was convinced that I was playing a prank on her and left the room whenever she walked away to get help, but several other people vouched for the fact that I had not walked out of the viewing room. My relatives and family friends in the viewing room had attested to the fact that I had been on the upper floor with them from the start and hadn't left even once. The lady who was part of the clergy who unlocked the door was entirely unamused and just locked the door to the supply room and went back upstairs, rather unfazed. My mom was pretty upset by the event and she's really easily spooked by paranormal stuff. She doesn't like to hear about it because it makes her really paranoid. I wasn't really freaked out or anything because I've been super sensitive to the paranormal since childhood and these sorts of odd, unexplainable experiences have followed me around constantly. I'm used to it, basically. But it was pretty cool that so many people had witnessed this happen that day. It's probably one of my favorite experiences, despite the fact that it wasn't a first-hand experience to this day, and it's definitely my favorite to share. I certainly don't know what to make of it. Not even a half hour ago, I just had one of the freakiest paranormal experiences I've had in a while. To give you some backstory, I live in an apartment attached to a funeral home. I'm a mortuary science student and I work for this funeral home to get experience while I'm in school to be a mortician. The funeral home happened to have a vacant apartment set privately in the back that I couldn't possibly turn down as I moved away from home for this school and I needed an inexpensive place to live. Since the day I moved in, I've been having notable paranormal experiences. For a couple months, I kept them to myself, not wanting to seem like I was feeding into some spooky funeral home stigma or making it up. But eventually, I was experiencing enough that I had to bring it up to a co-worker of mine, and she confirmed that she and a few other employees had seen and heard the same things I have. That being said, it's not news to any of us that the place is haunted, if that's what you want to call it. Now, onto my story. Today after I got home from class and went home, I was feeling extremely uneasy. My apartment felt extra dark and I felt sort of jumpy. I was standing in my bathroom braiding my hair and one of my co-workers texted me. She said she has a weird feeling and asks me to go check the front doors of the funeral home to make sure they are locked. I read her text as I braided my hair and her next message pops up. I'm 99% sure I locked it, but I just have a nagging feeling about something. I told her I'd go check. I finished braiding my hair and slipped on my shoes and walked to the door in my apartment that opens up into the back of the funeral home. The lights are off and I don't bother turning them on, as the motion sensors in the hallway always kick on by themselves. I made my way to the front lobby, which was dark, not counting the light through the front door windows. I walked to the front doors and pushed. Sure enough, both unlocked. At that moment, I had a really heavy feeling like someone was behind me or watching me. I kept turning around to look, but standing by the light at the doors and looking into the dark lobby made it almost impossible to see. I hurried up and locked the doors and made my way back through the lobby. As I was about to enter the hallway, I hear a little girl giggling. I stopped dead in my tracks for a moment, just at the end of her giggling. It sounded like it was coming from behind a door not 6 feet away from me. I got chills on my entire body and hightailed it back into the lit hallway and into my doorway. I locked the door behind me and immediately heard a loud bang from a room in the funeral home. I have no idea what it was, but it was loud. And I'm not about to go check. As I was standing there soiling my pants, I texted my coworker back saying the doors were both unlocked, and as I'm typing her my story of what happened, she says, "IDK man, I've been getting weird vibes in there all day. I think maybe it's safe to say the spirits in here are extra active today." It had been a few weeks since I've had anything too strange happen, but now I'm extremely on edge. There are 2 spirits that myself as well as 3 other coworkers have all seen. One is of a little girl. She looks maybe 8 years old, she's slightly taller than average, and she shows herself so briefly you wonder if you even saw it. I would almost say she looks 10, but when we hear her giggle, she sounds like a young girl of maybe 6 years old. The other is a tall, shadow-like man who wears a long black coat and a black hat. He's an entirely different story though. I'm chilled right now. Some days in here feel weirder than others, and tonight feels like the kind where I probably won't get any sleep. I feel so anxious right now. Usually these things happen in waves, so I feel like I'm just waiting for the next thing to happen. Thanks for reading. I've only ever had one thing happen that I couldn't explain away. I typically popped in the FH regularly to tidy things up, set up, tear down stuff for services, etc. And one day, I'm vacuuming per usual, and I'm just about finished. I've made it back to the outlet where I plugged the vacuum in, which is a narrow room with the restrooms on one of the longer wall sides and a door to the arrangement room on the short side. As I go to turn the vacuum off, I turn around to face most of this room, and the door to the arrangement room was closing. I watched that mother lover moving. I went over it again and again, thinking perhaps the floor wasn't level or something, anything, and I don't have a logical explanation for it. I think some people expect funeral homes to have more spooky stories since they house so many deceased human bodies, but I've never felt weird or spooked in the funeral homes, with the exception of that one time. I feel like a FH might even be less spooky in my eyes because it's so common for the deceased to pass through here. Another employee lived above the FH. I did not live on the premise, and she said she will never forget the time someone was playing the piano downstairs, and she thought our younger funeral director came home and was pranking her, but no one was there after she checked. I worked in a funeral home for a few years, and overall, it wasn't very weird or spooky. We would hear footsteps upstairs sometimes when no one was there, but after a while, we didn't really notice it. One night, after a long visitation, we were closing up and getting ready to leave. We locked the building from front to back, and at the end, there was only one door left unlocked. The back door facing the rear lot where we all parked. This door was right next to the door to the main office, where we were all sitting this particular evening. You couldn't see the back door from the office, but it was old and creaky and heavy, and the knob made a very distinct sound. There were 3 of us there, and we all heard what happened. We were making small talk and suddenly, the back door opened. We all distinctly heard the knob turn and the door open. A small chime went off in the office. All the doors had electronic chimes, so we could tell which was opening, and then the door slammed. We all looked at each other in surprise because we weren't supposed to lock up the building until every car had left the lot. A lot of times, the family will come back in after leaving to have a few more minutes alone with the deceased. I ran out to see what was going on. There was nothing there. I opened the door. Not only was the parking lot empty, but the building was long enough that someone walking out would have still been in sight by the time I looked out there. We spent 20 minutes combing the building, making sure no one had come inside. Nothing. I was pretty freaked out, but one of the other guys that was with me, a very old man, thought it was hilarious. He said it was the deceased walking out after all of his friends and family. That didn't make me feel any better.